I just want to dance to this music every time I hear it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. So we are so blessed to have the beautifully talented, amazing Dr. Jeannie Whitman. She is a welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What an intro. Thank you.
We're so excited. It's really an honor. And I was literally reading the email that you sent last night, like over and over, because our topic today is senior depression, depression in seniors and the elderly. And it touches my heart very much because I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder a couple years ago, and it's such a real thing, and it's not just in your head, and it's a diagnosed clinical issue, and it's becoming an epidemic in our seniors and our senior population. And I know you have a ton of experience in this area, so we just want to jump right into it and just get started on some topics, some statistics.
All right. Thank you for having me. What a privilege to be here and talk about a subject that is was close to my heart. And I think first, before we look at depression, I think we need to look at ourselves a little bit, kind of hold ourselves up in the mirror as to what our own personal views are about seniors. What's our own personal view about aging? What do we think about aging? Because it can scare some people and put us into a place where we avoid dealing with anybody that's not doing it well, because it may be us one day. Or, what is our exposure to seniors? Did we grow up with seniors? Did we see models of healthy aging? Or was our models more of sick aging? Or do we have models in our life of mental illness and aging? So that's likely to color our perspective, so that we may or we may not look at someone and be willing to say, this person's trouble. We need to get them help. And I'll never forget having someone tell me one time, I said, this patient is depressed. And the person said, well, of course they're depressed. They're old.
Oh my God.
Which tells you their worldview and their perspective. So what's important in approaching depression in the elderly, depression in anybody, but in particular this age group, is that depression is not a normal process of aging. It is not normal for aging process. So we need to be able to look at not losing a person in a diagnosis. We don't treat symptoms, we treat people. We don't work on fixing people. We come alongside people and we help them develop solutions for living. And we recognize that whatever process they're in, they need connectivity. And we can, basically our job is to hold a flashlight and be able to say, let us help you deal with some coping strategies. You don't have to live this way. There are more options. And so I think that's important for setting the groundwork of depression. We have a large portion of our senior society that is clinically depressed. And that's different than being depressive. And you had mentioned and just disclosed that you yourself have struggled with depression. And that takes a lot of courage to say that, and thank you for that. That we need to be able to come out of the shadows and say, let's destigmatize this.
Yeah. So
that we can really help people and know that there are treatments. Depression is actually one of the best disorders, most treatable disorders that we have.
And that's encouraging. That's very encouraging.
There's lots of resources and lots of therapy type of evidence-based treatments that help people. You don't have to languish feeling that way.
Well, and it's not, my prayer is that at some point the stigma in our Christian society, in life in general, that stigma, if somebody is clinically depressed or does need to take medication, that the stigma is removed from that. And, I truly believe, and the Lord just put this on my heart, that I was told at one point that I don't need to take medication for my depression. I need to pray about it. And that I'll never forget that, because I really had to pray through that, because I just thought, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I have prayed countless, hours, pleading with the Lord, you know, why is this the way that you made me? And, you know, it is what it is. And so, and through that, we could go on. This will be a whole other topic. But that's my prayer. And I want people to be open and willing to, if you have no idea about depression, if you don't have any people in your life that have it, or you just don't really know the truth about it, just to be open. And especially if you're seeing your loved ones, your aging parents, your any in-laws, anybody that might have those classic symptoms that we're going to talk about, because it's different. A lot of the research that I did yesterday was talking about the symptoms of elderly depression, and depression in someone like me who's 36 looks different. And another good thing too, there's so many things, I'm very passionate about this subject, is about grief versus depression. Can you touch on that? What the differences look like in the elderly population?
Sure. Grief is a normal process of life. When we lose someone, it's a bereavement. Bereavement is an outpouring of grief. There is a distinction. I guess I could talk about it on a continuum, perhaps. And let me first kind of tease out a little bit depressive versus depressed, if I may, because grief looks a little bit like depression. And it's more about the longevity, the duration of the symptoms. Now, in clinical depression, as identified by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, which is the most current version, is there are 9 symptoms of depression, of which we need to meet 5 or more of those 9. And we can have several of those and not meet diagnostic criteria.
Okay.
But the 2 most important that you must have in order to be able to reach clinical diagnosis is a pervasive sense of sadness. And what I mean by sad, every day for at least 2 weeks. Okay, variations of sadness. And then also the party word is anhedonia. But what that party word really means is pulling away from things that once gave you pleasure. It's a detaching, it's a distancing. And so grief is similar to depressive symptoms in that we are mourning the loss, and we can become preoccupied with the one we lost. Sometimes we life's not worth living, and I just want to join my person. That does not necessarily mean they're depressed. Grief comes in waves. It washes over us. Grief goes about, I don't know what to do with my life now. I've identified myself as this person's partner, this person's child, and I don't have them. What's my role? Especially if they were a caregiver. And who am I now? And so that's life transition. That's grief. Over time, grief will lessen. We never stop losing the person, but the power of that loss diminishes. Now, in depression, the focus becomes more internalized. I am bad. My life's not worth living. I'm self-critical. I'm angry. I'm irritable. But you also can have, I've lost my appetite. I don't really want to be around people. I'm sad. And so do you see how it's more, depression eats within, and it's a corrosive from within. And so we need to, when we look at seniors or in particular, we need to know this person, basically. How have they done their life? What kind of losses have they had? How have they reconciled their life with what they are currently? Because if you were depressed at 20, 30, and 40, you can be depressed at 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Okay, so we need to know, because the risk factors are if you've had a previous history of depression, whether it's diagnosed or not diagnosed, there's a chance that you can have a recurrent depression. So we need to know that. We need to know if there's a family history of depression. We also need to know how they've done loss. Erik Erikson has these stages of development, and his stage of development that people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, sometimes later 50s, it's called generativity versus despair. So you do life reviews. that's why reminiscent therapy has been so powerful in senior populations, is that they do a life review. How well have I done in my life? They've had losses. People that are 85, 90 years old have seen more changes than we've ever seen. I mean, they go from telephone, smartphones, dial-up phones, no TV, black and white TV, remote control.
Welcome to social media.
Welcome to social media. To no electricity. So they've navigated a lot of changes. That's why a person who's 20 does depression different than a person who's in their 80s.
That's a good point.
It's wear and tear. It is accumulation of life stresses. And it's the ability as a society to go, you're 20, you've got so much to live for, come on, let's give you all these resources. In an elderly person, the resources become diminished. If you're in poverty area, what are your resources? One of the keys, no matter what age you are, is attachments. Who is around you? Who can you reach out for? Loneliness has become pervasive. I've had clients, because I see people, my youngest is 12, my oldest is 87, so right currently. And to a person, it is, I don't know how to make friends, or I'm lonely. And if we just go, oh, okay, we'll just get on social media, that's actually increasing our loneliness. We're become more isolative. And some of these risk factors for depression are who are our social support? What are our unconditional supports? That's why animal therapy, because animals are unconditional love. They don't look at you and say, what is with your hair? They don't look at you and say, put on a few pounds. They love you. And so we need to be able to not look at people and try to fix them as if they're a combination of broken parts.
And fix them in a box.
Yes. We need to know, how do you live your life? We really, and what's so valuable is family history, if we can get it.
Well, one example for me, my dad was really lonesome and was like, if you just moved me to a place where I could meet people. So we found a place for him, moved him, and he would not leave his apartment. No matter how much coaxing, encouraging, we found activities and called, hey, Dad, there's an activity for veterans today at 2.
We found some single ladies. He still wouldn't go mingle.
He would not go. So how do you address that kind of a thing? And even as a healthcare professional, it was frustrating for me. And I know, a lot about this industry, but so how would you address something like that? A family member that, feels they've done everything they can do?
Well, good question. I'll give you in response to that, my own personal example. My mom was in an assisted living, and my dad was in the memory care Alzheimer's. Dad was social. Never met a stranger. If you stood still long enough, he would sing to you. My mom, we would say, there's tea, you can come down. Of course, she would come down for meals, because that was the big social activity. Or get your hair done, which is also an important social activity. But trying to get her engaged to pull out. And so people were getting like, what do we do? How do we get her out? And I'm saying, okay, let's look at her life. Just because you turn 85 doesn't mean you're going to love bingo.
Okay? That's a good point.
She never went out to do things like that. What fed her, what nourished her, was her church. She had phone friends that she'd get on there and talk about what was happening. She'd read the paper. She'd watch the television and talk about that. This traditional home, my dad would come home and she would, have the meal on the table. And, she never was someone who was a social bee. To expect someone to transition out of what they're known, their comfort zone, even though we're built for connectivity. But we've got to let them do them. So what does social look like for them? And you continue to say, well, let's go out to dinner. hey, Dad, hey, Mom, why don't we stop over here and check out? So it's almost like a spontaneity that's helpful than a planned event, because then they can come up with all the reasons in the world why they don't want to do it. But if you happen upon things, then that can be helpful. You have to know your person. And then not try to impose what you think. This is hard. The whole sense of autonomy, when we age, the way we see ourselves changes. The way other people see us changes, and not at the same rate, because we see ourselves as being essentially the same person we were before. The world looks at us as, no, you sit down, we'll take care of this. You don't need to do that. You are older, so you don't get it. And so many stories, so many life lessons, and we used to tell stories in this country and pass them along. We don't do that any longer. And when you mention veterans, Joe, that's a very important population that I think needs to be addressed in separate from just a aging population, especially if they're combat veterans. Is that something you'd like me to?
Oh, please.
Yeah, that would be great.
I think that's so important.
When you had someone, and we've got to look, we still have, they're dying off at a rapid pace, the World War II generation. Then we have our Korea veterans. It's going to be a little different when we get the Vietnam War, and then the OEF, OIF, Operation New Dawn, which will be coming up in the next 20, 30 years or so. But our World War II vets, 16, 17, 18, because some of them snuck into the war because that's what you did. And those that saw combat, they were expected to come home, put their head down, pull themselves up by the bootstraps. This generation doesn't complain. This generation puts their head down and works. So what happens with what they were exposed to in terms of traumatic stressors gets put in a nice, neat little box. And they're busy, 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 busy. Now what happens as we age is we begin to loosen in our cognitive functioning. The filters get looser. Therefore, we start feeling things that we didn't allow ourselves to do before. But the problem is they don't have a voice of knowing how to express it. And they're not complainers. And so to be able to watch people who struggle that you know have that and give them permission if they will. See, my dad never talked about, and he was Marine, combat, in World War II, Okinawa and Saipan. And he gave me a book to read, and he had underlined some, that's as close as he got, except in the dementia process where there would be a few things that would come out. But people that don't talk still experienced it. And what you see sometimes with veterans and aging and depression is that they get, instead of sad, they get angry, or they get agitated, or they get combative.
Right.
And they don't know what to do with all of this. So making sure they have connectivity with veterans groups, or being able to reminisce if they will. But watch your TV content. Sometimes you go into places and there are war movies on, or there are things that are inappropriate and triggering for people. Most of the post-traumatic stress in our veterans have been undiagnosed because we didn't have it as a diagnosis till 1980. And it's the Vietnam generation, the war veterans, that actually brought that to a head. So now we have coalesced symptoms. But who gets sick, who doesn't? And that's been part of my research.
Wow.
And to be able to how to address it and help people.
Do you think for family members of our veterans, it's really beneficial to encourage them to go to a veteran support group so they can be able to talk, if they want to talk about things, just even if I feel like even if they're not willing to really discuss things, because I mean, even Joe's dad fought in the Korean War. He was a fighter pilot in the Korean War, and I so wanted more stories, and I loved talking to him about it, but it would only go so far.
Right. It was the good times.
It was the good times.
Singing.
Of course, nobody wants to talk about, oh, it was, this is how many people died in one day under my airplane. I mean, I understand that nobody really wants to go there, but how do we as family members and daughters and sons, grandkids, how do we encourage any type of it's okay? Or what does that look like?
Really good question. I wished I could give you a one-size-fits-all. And the answer is the ubiquitous, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the person. I think one people really like is appreciation. On Memorial Day.
That's a great point.
On Veterans Day. So that we remember. Mm-hmm. We remember. And you can ask leading questions. You know, what is what you missed most when you were deployed? Or what do you remember? Tell me something about your battle buddies. Or tell me, because really what we don't want them to do is to go into dark places. Our brain will take us there anyway. Mm-hmm. What we want them to do is make connections and reconsolidate memories so that they lay smoother. Okay. So that they're saying, remember the generativity versus despair? Mm-hmm. So that they look back and go, yeah, I'm proud of my service. I showed up. And when you talk to like World War II or Korean veterans, they go, I just did what I was supposed to do. Yeah. So they're not big on the,
and I feel like, excuse me, as they age, a lot of those veterans are very stoic. And all their family knows is this stoic, responsible, quiet, reserved man. Mm-hmm. And so even for the family, it's hard for them to dig deep or a little deeper. And I see that with our patients. The families are so respectful because they're used to, that's how they've always treated their father or their mother. And so it's hard for them to see them as aging. It's hard for them to see them where the roles are starting to be reversed. That's what I try to explain to families, and now it's time for you to be the parent. How would you want to be treated? How would you want this conversation to look like? It's hard. It's very hard.
It is, but and reaching out to children or people who become caregivers of their own parents, there's a lot of one thing that I learned from my dad, and I was a gerontologist. I traveled the country putting together Alzheimer's programs, training people on how to work with this, not knowing that 20 years later it'd be my dad. And so you get to see two sides of that. What's interesting with my father is that, we talk a lot about mindfulness and living in the now. This disease process, as devastating as it is, gets us practice in now living. Mm. Who is this person now? How can I be with him now? And we're the ones that do the behavioral change. Yeah. But it's really important that no matter how long you live, you believe you're an adult. And unless the dementia process has been so degenerative, they always remember that I brought you into the world. Yes. So that kind of reversal of let me be your parent often isn't very successful because they remember it's how do I come alongside you? How do I love you in the now? How do I share this moment with you? And then you have your grief process that happens as well. It's a both and world. It's not an either or, but they you be with the person. And to the point of being able to help someone and get their stories out, oftentimes it's not the family. In fact, there's research that indicates support groups is often better when it's not the family. It's your peer group. Mm-hmm. Because with family, you're always, do I need to protect this person from this story, or do I need to and they still see you as a vulnerable person. But a peer, you can say things to your peers. So if you want to collect stories, get somebody that's non-family or get somebody tangential to the family, a friend, take up a phone and record the stories and say, tell me about XYZ.
Well, talk about back to the suicide and say I get a call. My mother says, Joe, I don't want to live like this. I want to end my life. I'm I'm miserable. I can't live like this. What do I do other than call 911 or try to talk them down? What does an adult child do with that situation?
Oftentimes, people don't want to die. They want the pain to stop.
Mm-hmm.
They want a way of coping, and they don't have the resources at that point, or they don't see their options. It's like when there's fog over the city of Dallas, but you know there are buildings behind it. You can't see it. But eventually, if you can help somebody say, I'm with you through this, the fog will lift and you'll see clearer. Right now, you're not seeing real clear. That happens after loss. It happens in grief. It happens in depression. And what we need to do is when someone says, I want to die or I want to take my life, you take that very seriously. And you go, okay, instead of reacting, you use that. There's a cry for help. And that's a wonderful thing if they say. A lot of people don't say things to you because they don't want you to thwart their plan, because they've made a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And that piggybacks on the depressive side. When someone's depressed and suddenly starts feeling better, I pay close attention because now they have the energy to do something about it. When someone gets out of the hospital, the research says that they're more inclined to end their life by suicide than before they went in.
Wow, interesting.
Watch the critical moments when you change them from a home environment to an assisted living, to nursing, to anything that results in a critical type of change. We got to watch because it's hard to move. I just moved my office. That's stressful. Now, you got other things going on. That's stressful too.
Mm-hmm.
So, watching people, not as a helicopter caregiver, because you don't want to play gotcha.
Right.
You want to see, because depression is a departure from the norm of that person, which means you've got to know the norm of that person.
And I think going back to what you said about making sure we know who they are now, piggybacking on when they get out of the hospital, that's really a challenging time. I think that's a great time to be able to plug into exactly what did they love to do growing up? What did they, who were they? Who are they? And really trying to make sure that those activities, crosswords, if they liked playing cards, going on walks, if they are mobile, all those different things, because that will help encourage them to keep on going and not go to that darker place where they could go.
It's been said that we can live, 2 weeks basically without food. We can live just short of that without water, 6 minutes or so without air. We cannot live without hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we must have that. So what does that look like for different people? And I can tell you, with an epidemic of loneliness, that people want to connect. And you know what that looks like? It looks like touch, and not task touch. Touch. I've seen people bump into people by accident just to have touch.
Just to touch, yeah.
People will go frequent hospital visits and doctor's visits so someone will touch them. But they don't raise their hands and say, please touch me. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be that for them. Be around. Listen. Just listen. And when someone says, to your point, Joe, to a child, that's scary to hear that. It's threatening to hear that. And we want to say, oh, Dad, oh, Mom, things will get better. I've never seen someone say, oh, okay, you're right.
Right.
I've never seen. So when you tell somebody who's angry, don't be angry. I don't see people go, oh, yeah, I shouldn't really be angry.
Okay, now I'm not angry anymore.
People get to feel what they need to feel.
And they need validation.
They do.
Dr. Whitman, I feel like that's a
You're
huge
right.
part of it.
I understand how you could feel that way.
And not arguing with the person. I know especially if there's dementia symptoms as well. And I know in families it can be hard to communicate because they used to be a certain way and now literally their brain has changed and they are a different way. And it's confusing and it's frustrating and people don't understand that. But really just stepping back and saying, I absolutely, what can we do about this? Or just listening and having that validation. If that person that told me that all those years ago just validated me, it would have been I would have felt a whole different way about myself at that time, because then I was like, I'm broken. Like something's wrong with me. I'm not spiritual enough. Clearly my relationship with the Lord is not where it needs to be if this is where I am. And when you're talking about hope, and one of the main things too, and I know our time is almost up, but when you said to be able to, the protective factors that may buffer an individual from depression or suicide, and a lot of one of the main ones that I really focused on was living your beliefs. And if your loved ones went to church, if they sang in the choir, there are some people in our church who are in our choir for years and years, and then only until recently, the past year, they haven't been able to, just because of mobility issues and things. But that helps keep people going, and that is the hope that we have. And if your loved one, if that's what they love doing, or they were part of that, or if they've just gone away from that, turn on a church service online. Play praise music. I know that a lot of times in the office, in our offices, we'll just play praise music when, just
when it's getting
stressful, and it helps. So all of those things and all those factors, if they loved, this goes to the, kind of getting off topic, but it's the same thing. The Alive Inside movie that we're going to have as part of our hospice symposium this year. If they love music, that's another thing to help just lift people up, and it connects them with where they used to, a great place in their memory and their brain of happiness. And so that's a big, I think music touches more people than not.
It's transcendent. And music, songs take us back. And be prepared, some songs make us cry. That's okay.
Yeah.
Remember, in the aging process, it's about reconsolidating. It's about life review. And it's about putting grace around our errors and our mistakes and our failures. And it's about saying, okay, I don't have as much road in front of me as I do behind me, but what can I do now? What's today? Not what the next 10 years or what's today? What can we do today? And in terms of living your beliefs, if your audience have not read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and this is a gentleman who survived concentration camps. And so he saw pretty much the worst that humans can do to one another. And he said that the heart of people's ability to survive is the ability to find meaning. What is meaning? And how do you act on that? And for, we know through research, just across the board, empirical research on loss, grief, disaster, and crisis, is that people that have a spiritual connection have a group of people that share beliefs with them. It takes them above and beyond what the now is and into hope. And here again, we circle back to hope.
Hope, yeah.
And so the unconditional support systems, whether it's animals or things, the support period, people showing up, attachment, getting them access to treatment, letting them know that they can get help. They don't have to languish with this. Recognizing that depressed is not a synonym for old. And it's not something that people need to live with. And so we get to listen and observe and kind of just be with that person.
We could talk about this all.
I know.
You're so amazing, and I'm so thankful that you're here.
Thank you.
And I'm going to post your information on underneath this video if people want to get a hold of you. If you have questions, we're also I'm going to put also the friendship line that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So I'm going to post that phone number as well, so you have it in case you need a resource, because it's just important to have resources. Please share this. We want to just get the word out there.
So much, Dr.
You're
Whitman.
welcome. Thank you. It's so important, and I just appreciate the opportunity to touch a little bit on this. I hope it's helpful to people.
Very helpful. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless you.
Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.